What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review of The Outer Worlds. So as you could probably tell right off the bat, this review is super late, right? So I'm probably 2 or 3 weeks behind everybody else. So for starters, I don't get pre-release copies, so obviously I kind of am going to inherently be delayed compared to major gaming news outlets. With that in mind, I always kind of think, well, I might as well finish the game and kind of do everything there is to do and try to give as complete a review as possible. That way I'm, at least reviewing the things that I enjoyed about the game and at least trying to provide some differences between my experience and the experience of these people who have the game for a few days beforehand. Jumping straight into it. The basic setup of the game, obviously, is very Fallout inspired. You are a colonist that was stranded on a ship known as the Hope. Everyone was frozen in cryogenic stasis for the journey to the Halcyon colony, which is basically the new frontier of human exploration, which happens to be owned by a bunch of companies. These companies are kind of notoriously cheap and devoid of most moral character. The other ship, the Groundbreaker, made it and established the Halcyon colony, whereas the Hope was lost. It was eventually found, but they were unable to bring everyone out of cryogenic stasis without kind of killing them. So they just kind of left the ship float out in space. A scientist known as Dr. Phineas Wells is able to start reviving people. However, he does not have the chemicals necessary to revive everyone, just you. Now, your character is kind of really whoever you want him to be. You can customize them, all that. There's a bunch of character creation options, but your role in the story is basically to decide the future of the Halcyon colony, the colonists of the Hope, and the current state of everything going on within the colony as far as board's control versus the free people's control, and kind of exploring some of those nuances. There's a couple different factions. Obviously, there's what they call the board. Now, the board is pretty much the major members of all 9, I believe is the exact number, of corporations that own the Halcyon colony. These are morally dubious at the very best. That's probably the nicest way to put it. Most of these companies literally own the people that are working for them. Dying is a crime and is considered a crime because you're affecting the company's productivity levels. So that's kind of the type of people you're dealing with there. Now, they run most of the colonies, obviously, because it's their overall colony. So each individual corporation tends to run a settlement of some sort. You see a few of them. Now, playing through the game, there is actually some fun interactions, especially when you get to Monarch with, not everyone on the board is fully on board, with what's going on with these corporations, even on the inside. There's, of course, Dr. Phineas Wells, of course, who is kind of not exactly a resistance per se, but a general disagreement with them, and he is basically very concerned with the future of the colony because there's been a lot of problems lately. The board has completely stopped even trying to fix a lot of problems, which a lot of people are reading into and drawing conclusions from, so he's very concerned with the long-term future. Then you have the actual Groundbreaker itself. Now, the people on the Groundbreaker have essentially taken over as a bit of a free society, if you will. So whereas the corporation seems to own basically everything on the actual planets that you explore, Terra 1 and Terra 2, the Groundbreaker seems to largely have evolved into its own free place to be. Kind of the only place where you can be that you're not necessarily, owned by the board. That said, the board still has a presence there, and there's kind of a constant back and forth between the board trying to take control of everything going on in the Groundbreaker versus the Groundbreaker being get off this ship. So there's kind of an interesting dynamic there. Something you have to keep in mind is that The Outer Worlds is a AA game. Now, Obsidian was, of course, bought by Microsoft, which is going to help them out in the future, but The Outer Worlds was pretty much done by the time that deal went through. They only had a little bit of wrap-up work to do. Some of the choices and the mechanics of the game, it can be not quite as widespread as you might initially think, especially given the game's promotion. But just keep in mind it's a AA game, and a lot of that stuff will be explained. So the attribute system is really cool. I like that it didn't use a numerical system for that. It kind of, it just made more sense to me the way they just use below average, average, good, that kind of thing. As well as the skill system and the perk system. These, of course, the game is inspired by Fallout, let's be real. So those systems aren't, anything groundbreaking. So we kind of expected them. Most of the RPG mechanics in the game are pretty standard tropes, speech, stealth, skills, melee brawler, ranged guy, that kind of thing. I will say the combat is not as expansive as I would have liked it to be. A personal thing I noticed that always kind of bothered me is that you can get a grenade launcher, but you cannot throw a grenade. So it's just kind of like little weird stuff like that. Then, of course, there is the probably most unique system that this game brought forward, and I've actually got to say I'm a huge fan of the flaw system. So basically, if you take a certain amount of damage from certain sources or you do a lot of one thing, you'll be presented to take a flaw, whereas, say you get attacked by a bunch of Raptidons, you can choose to be afraid of Raptidons for a perk point. I love the idea of this system, but in practice it tends to be a little lackluster. So the reason being is not the actual system itself, it's just that the perks aren't that great. All of the perks are kind of standard stuff. I mean, they're definitely helpful, but none of them are out of this world awesome. And because of that, the flaws, I'm basically crippling myself to take a point that I could just get leveling up, and it doesn't really affect your build in any way. So what I would like to see is that these perks expand in the future and kind of have more awesome options, like more game-changing stuff. That way, that will inherently kind of enrich the flaw system, which is already a great concept. So moving on from there to companions, you get 6 of them. One of them is a robot. One of them is Parvati, of course, the engineer that everyone seems to be in love with. Vicar Max, which is kind of a priest of sorts on the colony. Felix, which is kind of like your troubled youth guy. Ellie, who is a bit of a rebel, and then of course you get Nyoka, who is kind of a bounty hunter. First of all, you can't romance any of them. That was a big sticking point. You can only be great friends with all of them. And honestly, I think I actually kind of prefer it that way. So many games are you have to be able to romance one of them, and that has to be an option. Whereas all of these, you're basically just forced to either tell them to get over themselves or find a way to help them and be friends with them. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. It was instead of trying to see which companion you could bang, you actually have to make a meaningful connection or just completely ignore them. So I thought it was really cool. And it's not that it's better, it's just different. So I think that kind of helped it stand apart a little bit in that regard. All of that said, there are of course some technical problems, mostly screen tearing and stuff is a lot of the kind of things that I bumped into. Most of the quests seemed to work pretty well. I didn't have any problems there. But I definitely encountered some problems with hit detection and things at times. So nothing groundbreaking. Usually it was 1 or 2 swings. But there are a couple problems. Now, probably the biggest thing you'll notice, because it's very easily found, is that when you're in conversations with people, sometimes it'll cut to a companion. And when it does that cut, you'll see the textures load in on the companion for half a second. The reason they do that, of course, is because, it's loading that companion in on the spot. That way, I'm assuming that's something they did in an attempt to help with game optimization, but it's kind of immersion breaking to see cut to a companion and then kind of see everything load in the background when you're trying to have this RPG conversation. So things like that. Just a few technical problems, honestly not that many, at least that I personally explored. There was a couple of bugs that prevented one of the main story quests from completing. However, Obsidian is releasing a patch for that very soon. So that was probably the main one, and that is being addressed. But overall, a launch with not that many bugs. Now, my personal opinion of this game, you should totally buy it. I'm a little annoyed that it's a full $60 because I have played similar games, or at least similarly length games of quality for less than that. Greedfall, just last month was a great game, honestly very comparative to The Outer Worlds, and it launched at $50. So The Outer Worlds, I don't have a problem paying $60 for it. I just feel like they would have gotten some brownie points for making it $50. But that said, that's more of a publisher decision than necessarily Obsidian. But beyond that, definitely a buy-worthy game. You should absolutely check it out. If you don't want to buy it, I absolutely highly recommend just checking out gameplay mechanics. The freedom of choice is really great in this game, and it's kind of a nice thing to see that return to roots, especially the way a lot of RPGs try to cram you into linear paths that don't make any sense from a freedom of choice perspective that they try to sell you. So with The Outer Worlds letting you actually do those things that in this day and age RPGs like to take away from you, is just really great to see. So again, totally a buy from me, but obviously that's a personal decision you got to make. I'm not going to tell you how to spend your money, but I think it's definitely worth a buy. That said, that's all I got for you. If you enjoyed the video, certainly like, comment, and subscribe. Helps the YouTube algorithm, helps me out. Consider hitting the join button down there. You get some perks. It'll give me $1, which greatly helps out the channel with as small as I am. But honestly, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day either way.